When the great ocean liner RMS Titanic sank in the icy waters of the North Atlantic in April 19, it left behind one of the most devastating maritime disasters in history. More than 1,500 people lost their lives when the ship struck an iceberg and slowly disappeared beneath the freezing ocean. In the days that followed the tragedy, attention turned to the massive recovery effort that would search the vast Atlantic waters for those who had been lost during the sinking. News of the disaster spread quickly around the world. Families of passengers waited anxiously for information about their loved ones, while governments and shipping companies began organizing recovery missions. One of the first ships sent to the disaster area was the cable repair vessel CS Mackay-Bennett. The ship was specially prepared for the difficult task ahead. Crews gathered supplies, including coffins, identification materials, and equipment necessary for searching the ocean. The journey to the disaster site took several days. When the Mackay-Bennett finally reached the area where the Titanic had sunk, the crew was faced with a heartbreaking sight. Debris from the ship was scattered across the ocean's surface. Pieces of wood, furniture, and personal belongings floated among the waves, silently telling the story of the tragedy that had taken place only days earlier. The crew began the difficult process of searching the ocean for victims of the disaster. Small boats were lowered from the ship so that sailors could carefully move through the debris field. The work was slow and emotionally challenging. Each discovery reminded the crew of the human lives that had been lost in the cold waters of the Atlantic. As victims were recovered, the crew followed careful procedures to identify them whenever possible. Personal items such as watches, jewelry, wallets, and documents were collected and recorded. Clothing and other belongings sometimes helped reveal a person's identity. These efforts were extremely important because families around the world were desperately waiting for news about their relatives. In some cases, victims were placed in coffins so they could be returned to their families for burial. However, the recovery ships had limited space, and the number of victims was tragically large. As a result, difficult decisions had to be made about how to handle the remains respectfully and responsibly. Additional ships later joined the recovery mission, including the vessel CS Mackay-Bennett and the ship SS Minia. Together, these vessels continued searching the ocean for several weeks. The crews worked in cold and often dangerous conditions, determined to bring closure to as many families as possible. The recovery effort eventually located more than 300 victims. Many were successfully identified, allowing their families to learn what had happened to them. Some were transported to the city of Halifax, where funeral services and burials were arranged. Halifax soon became closely connected with the story of the Titanic because many of the victims were laid to rest in cemeteries there. For the crews involved in the recovery mission, the experience was deeply emotional. Many sailors later described how difficult it was to witness the aftermath of such a massive disaster. Despite the sadness, they understood that their work was important. By recovering victims and preserving their belongings, they helped provide answers and dignity to those who had been lost. The recovery mission also helped investigators understand more about the Titanic disaster. Objects recovered from the ocean provided clues about how the ship had broken apart and how passengers had responded during the evacuation. These findings later contributed to the official investigations that examined the causes of the tragedy. In the months and years that followed, the story of the Titanic continued to capture the attention of the world. Memorial services were held in many countries, honoring those who had lost their lives. The recovery mission played an important role in preserving the memory of the victims and ensuring that their stories would not be forgotten. Today, more than a century later, the Titanic remains one of the most studied disasters in maritime history. The work carried out by the recovery ships demonstrated compassion and dedication during a time of immense tragedy. Their efforts helped bring closure to families and created a historical record that continues to inform researchers and historians. The bodies recovered from the ocean after the Titanic disaster represent not only the scale of the tragedy, but also the determination of those who sought to honor the victims. Their recovery allowed the world to remember the individuals behind the headlines and ensured that the story of the Titanic would remain part of human history for generations to come.